I believe that after Saturday, I believe this. I believe that we now know who are the teams that are definitively good enough to win a national championship. Now, something crazy can always happen, but every single year we say, oh, it's so wide open, and the field usually condenses to about 4 or 5 teams that can legitimately win it all. I'm going to give you the data on that in a second, but first, I believe that after Saturday, I've seen enough college basketball. I believe that we are down to just 5 teams that can win the national championship this year. Other teams are good. Other teams can get to a Final Four. Other teams can maybe even get to a title game. But to win 6 games in March against 6 completely different types of teams and opponents and styles from different parts of the country, different conferences, I believe that we are down to 5 teams that can win the national championship this year. I'm going to give you the 5, and then I'm going to get into why, and then I'm going to give you 2 or 3 at the end that I do not believe are capable of winning it. The 5 that I believe, and I'll put them in alphabetical order, I don't know if I would have them in an order at this point. I believe we're down to 5 teams that can win a national championship this year. Number 1, Auburn. Number 2, Arizona. I guess I already didn't put it in alphabetical order, but whatever. Auburn, Arizona, Duke, Gonzaga, Kentucky. To me, those are the 5 teams, the only 5 teams right now that I believe are capable of winning a national championship. Other teams are good. Other teams are this. Other teams are that, but they're either too young, they're too flawed, they're too this, they're too that. They don't shoot well enough. They don't defend well enough. They don't rebound well enough. I believe those are the only 5 teams right now that can win a national championship, and I feel good about that for the rest of the season. We have enough data. I don't need more time. That is the fact. Give me those 5. Auburn, Arizona, Gonzaga, Duke, Kentucky. You take the field. I feel really good. And before we get into why I like those 5 teams, why I believe those are the 5 teams that are capable of winning it all, let me even backtrack and let me give you some stats that I do think are important. And they're stats that if you are a longtime listener of the Aaron Torres Sports Podcast, you've probably heard me rattle off before. But what I hate about this time of year in college basketball, first of all, I hate college basketball. I love them individually as people, but I do think too many people in the college basketball media just regurgitate the same thing. One guy or girl says one thing, and everybody just shares it as if it's fact. And one thing that gets shared all the time this time of year is, this year, college basketball is so wide open. There are so many teams that can win it all. It could be one of 10 or 15 or 20. Well, here's the bottom line. You'll probably hear Jay Billis say that over the next couple weeks. You might hear some other broadcaster say it over the next couple weeks. Here's the bottom line. Maybe this year is the exception, but factually, it's simply not true. And how do I know it's not true? Well, I got the data to back it up, and I've shared this stat before, but I think it always blows people away when I say it. Every year people say, it's so wide open, anybody could win it. Well, that's not really true, because over the last 15 years, okay? So this is the data dating back to 2007 when Florida won its 2nd national championship under Billy Donovan with the Joakim Noah, Al Horford, or whatever. Since 2007, 14 NCAA tournaments have been played. Obviously, the 2021 has been canceled. 2020 tournament was canceled. So 14 tournaments since 2007. Here are the facts. Of those 14 tournaments, 11 of those tournaments were won by a number 1 seed. So 11 of the 14 tournaments were won by a number 1 seed. The 3 years that a number 1 seed did not win the national championship, 2011, UConn, who had Kemba Walker, who was definitively the best player in the tournament, and I would argue was playing essentially as a 1 seed by the end of the year. They won the Big East, which was the toughest conference maybe in the history of college basketball that year. They set a conference record with 11 NCAA tournament bids. UConn wins the Big East tournament before they go to the NCAA tournament. They have the definitive best player in college basketball. 2014, UConn won it actually as a 7 seed, but they had Shabazz Napier, the best player in the tournament. And then in 2016, Villanova won the national championship as the highest-ranked 2 seed. So what I can tell you is this. Jay Billis, whoever, they're going to tell you, this is the most wide open we've ever seen it. And that may be true. But what I can tell you is, over the last 15 years, we have pretty concrete data. If you're not a number 1 seed or you don't have the definitive best player in the tournament, you ain't winning this thing. And so with that said, I feel very confident that we are down to 5 teams that can legitimately win it all because, again, there's a difference between a team that's good enough, and I think this is another important caveat too. I gave you the stats on the national championship, and when people say it's wide open, what I think they really mean is there are a lot of teams that could get to a Final Four, and that I don't disagree with. Somebody asked me this morning, who are your dark horses to get to a Final Four? Well, there's like 30 of them. We've had 5 seeds, 6 seeds, 7 seeds, 8 seeds make Final Fours. But there's a difference between getting to a Final Four and winning a national championship. You get to a Final Four, it's great, you cherish it forever, but you still got 2 more games to win to call yourself the national champion. And so I believe that we are down to 5 teams that are capable of winning a national championship, and let me get into each of them and why I believe those teams are good enough to win it. First of all, I know I said I'd go alphabetical order. I know Arizona's before Auburn, but my notes have Auburn first because I'm an idiot. So let's start with Auburn. And what I would say with Auburn is, first of all, I mean, if you don't buy into Auburn right now, I don't know what to tell you. It's February 14th as you guys listen to this. Auburn has played 25 games. As we record here, they are 23-2, 11-1 in SEC play, and they still haven't lost a single game in regulation. So, I mean, we're literally talking about 1 or 2 bounces the other way. They beat UConn, they beat Arkansas, and I don't feel any different about Auburn this week than I did last week just because they went to Bud Walton Arena, one of the craziest arenas that we've seen in recent college basketball history, and were upset in some ways by Arkansas. In some ways they weren't upset because Arkansas is a really good team that was playing at home, and this is college basketball in February. You go on the road, you play good teams, and sometimes you take losses. And so to me with Auburn, I don't feel any different about them today just because they lost to Arkansas the other day. As a matter of fact, in many ways, I feel better on this Monday, February 14th, Valentine's Day, because of what I saw Saturday. You lose on the road Tuesday, Wednesday night, whatever it was against Arkansas, that it's easy to kind of, hang your head and feel bad and feel this. Well, then they come back and they destroy Texas A&M, which is probably a fringe bubble NIT-ish type team. But you destroy Texas A&M and you get right back on track. And so in many ways, not only am I not worried about Auburn after that loss, I feel a lot better. I'll take it a step further from a few weeks ago. Remember we had Bruce Pearl on the podcast the week that Auburn became number 1 in the country? And remember what he said? He said, we're going to struggle. We're going to have some losses. We're not going undefeated the rest of the way. So the fact that they still won 3-4 games afterward when Bruce Pearl knew we got the target on our back, I feel really good. In terms of why I like Auburn, let me say this. Sometimes in life and sometimes in basketball, there is a difference between the best player and the most important player. The best player and the player with the intangibles that take you over the top. Let me give you an extreme example, okay? And I'm not comparing these college basketball players to these NFL players. Tom Brady, you could argue, at no point was ever the most talented quarterback in the NFL. Peyton Manning played during the Tom Brady era. Brett Favre played during the Tom Brady era. Patrick Mahomes right now probably has more God-given talent. Josh Allen, you could argue, has more God-given talent. I said Peyton Manning, Aaron Rodgers. You go on and on down the list. But Tom Brady had the intangibles that help you win. And I bring it up as it pertains to Auburn because of this. Not saying that Jabari Smith doesn't help you win. But to me, there's a difference between the best player and the most important player. And Jabari Smith might be the best, most talented player in college basketball. If I had the number 1 pick of the NBA draft, I'd have a hard time passing him up. But what I realized this weekend definitively is this. Walker Kessler, the big 7'1" transfer center from North Carolina, is Auburn's most important player. And I would argue probably the second most important player to his team in college basketball, trailing only Oscar Tshiebwe at Kentucky. What do I mean by that? First of all, did you see the stat line that Walker Kessler put up on Saturday in the win over Texas A&M? How about this for a stat line? 12 points, 11 rebounds, and 12 blocks for Walker Kessler on Saturday against Texas A&M. Unbelievable stat line. Whenever you get a triple-double with blocks, that's incredible. And this, by the way, after he went for 16, 19 rebounds and 7 blocks against Arkansas the other day. And so why I like Auburn and why I like this team specifically is because I believe Walker Kessler, you can argue, changes the game on both ends of the court more than anybody in college basketball. He's the clear defensive national player of the year. He's a guy that averages close to 4 blocks per game, second in the country behind only that kid that's 7'6" or whatever from Western Kentucky. But also on offense, he's so big, so long, so athletic that the guards, all you got to do is throw it up at the rim, and he's going to go down and get it. And oh, by the way, I got to correct myself because with the 12-block performance, Walker Kessler now leads college basketball with 4.6 blocks per game, which is most in college basketball. Walker Kessler, to me, changes the game more on any level than anyone in college basketball. More than that, though, and here's why this is important, is that it's not just Walker Kessler. I just mentioned it. They might have the number 1 pick in the draft also in the front court. His name's Jabari Smith. You may have heard of him. He's 6'10". He shoots 40+% from 3. He's Auburn's leading scorer, and he's going to be the number 1 pick in the draft. Beyond him, KD Johnson, I've talked about him, transfer from Georgia. Just a strong, tough guard, emotional leader of this team. I like the other guards, too. They've been playing without Seb Jasper, who's a really important piece as their starting point guard. Wendell Green, another transfer, has been phenomenal. And so when I look at this team, we can do the song and dance about Arkansas and what does it mean. And, yeah, they beat Kentucky, but Kentucky was banged up. I don't care. What I am telling you is Auburn has all of the pieces to win the national championship. They are one of 5 that I believe can win it all. The second team I want to talk about, it's the Arizona Wildcats. And it's really interesting, right? Because if you listen to this podcast on a day-to-day, week-to-week basis, you remember about 2 weeks ago, I was at the Arizona-UCLA game. And prior to going to the game, I swung by Arizona practice on Wednesday in the lead-up to the game on Thursday. And what I said was this with Arizona. I have seen now in person this season, I saw Duke in person in Vegas against Gonzaga. I've obviously seen Gonzaga twice, both against Duke and UCLA. I have seen UCLA now 3 times in person. I've seen Villanova. So I've seen, by any tangible measurement, 3 of the top probably 6 or 7 teams in the country, Gonzaga, Duke, Arizona, seen UCLA, which is a top 10 team, and seen Villanova, which is probably a top 12 to top 15 team. What I can definitively tell you is that when they walk in the gym, the Arizona Wildcats are the single most impressive team in college basketball. No disrespect to anybody else. Not saying other people don't have great athletes. That's not what I'm saying. Calm down, random fan. There is no team that is more physically impressive when they walk in the gym than Arizona. It's not just that they have Christian Coloco, who's 7'1", and that he has a backup named Umar Ballo, who's 7'1". They also have Azuolas Tubelis, 6'10" on the front court. But what really stands out when you see Arizona, their guards are so big. Kirk Kriisa, their point guard, is about 6'3", but then you have Dalen Terry, who's 6'6", Ben Mathurin, who's going to be a lottery pick, who's 6'6", and you walk in the gym and you say, how does anybody ever beat these guys? Well, nobody's really beating them because, as I tweeted or as I said on Instagram, I don't think we appreciate what Arizona has done really over the last 4 or 5 games, really the last 10 days or so. But Arizona, because of the goofy Pac-12 cancellations, COVID that happened in mid to late December into January, Arizona had to play 5 games in the last 9 days. And when I talk about Arizona, here's what you need to know. 5 games last 9 days. They went 5-0, 3 straight road wins, all by double figures. And I don't care that they play in the Pac-12. I know, they don't play anybody. And yes, I think even Arizona would like to have more tournament caliber teams in the middle of the conference. But when you go to Washington State, which is a bubble team, and you basically dominate from start to finish. When you go 5-0 in a 9, that's like an NBA schedule. 5-0, 9-game stretch. You are really, really, really good when you have 3 of those wins on the road. I don't care who the opponents are. I don't care what conference you play in. When you go 5-0 over a 9-game stretch, 3-0 on the road, and by the way, they beat at least one NCAA tournament caliber team in Washington State by 12 on the road in their biggest home game in forever. I'm sorry, this team is good. And what I would say is, again, I don't care that they play in the Pac-12. Just watch this team. First of all, offensively, it's just poetry in motion. It's beautiful. And I had Kentucky fans and this fan base, I don't care. I don't watch them. They don't play anybody. Well, you're just missing out. I mean, listen, you can watch bad SEC basketball. Go watch Georgia, Missouri. Have your heart out. What's the term that I'm missing here? Bleed your heart. I don't know what the term is, but have a blast watching Georgia, Missouri. I'm going to watch Arizona because on offense, they are absolutely incredible. And I've said it many times. Sean Miller, a lot of things went wrong under his watch, but one thing you can't deny is this. He left the cupboard full for Tommy Lloyd, and Tommy Lloyd, I believe, has taken it to another level. This is how good they are on offense. Number 3 nationally in scoring, 84 points per game. Number 1 in assists. Number 11 in field goal percentage. And so you just watch them. It is this beautiful ball motion, poetry, ball movement, motion, passing, cutting, dribbling, dunking. They are just so fun to watch. They're so physically more dominant than so many teams that they play. They are, in my opinion, I think they're the funnest team to watch in college basketball. But what I do think people forget is when you think of Tommy Lloyd and you think of the Gonzaga style and you think of now being at Arizona, you think, well, they just score a bunch of points. They don't play defense. Well, that's simply not true. Now, part of it is they have two dominant 7-footers down low. I think that in many ways, if you took Arizona's 3 off the bench, Umar Ballo, Justin Kier, and Pella Larson, I think you could make the case that that's probably the foundation of an NCAA tournament team in its own right. But when you have the size and physicality that they have, everybody thinks, oh, all they do is play offense. Well, here's the bottom line. You know who's number 2 in the country in field goal percentage defense behind only Houston? It's the Arizona Wildcats, and it is because they're so dominant up front with Christian Coloco and Umar Ballo. And so listen, if you want to argue, if you want to sit here and say they don't play anybody, they're in the Pac-12, what? I don't care. You do what you want. I'm going to watch the best, funnest, most exciting teams in college basketball, and I believe Arizona this year is good enough to win a national championship. I do, if you're asking me for a concern about Arizona, do worry a little bit about do they have enough ball handling outside of Kirk Kriisa, who, of course, is a sophomore from Estonia. But I really, really, really like this team, and I think they really, really, really have a chance to be good. Number 3 on my list, and I've already mentioned it, my list, it's Duke. And here's the thing with Duke, right? I originally put out the tweet that I put out on Sunday. I put it out on Saturday, and I had only 4. I had Auburn, Arizona, Gonzaga, Kentucky. And then I decided, you know what? I have to include Duke. Because the thing about Duke is this, is on the one hand, I think that they are the most inconsistent of all of the teams on this list. Like, you look at Arizona, they had one bad night all season, and that was against maybe the most talented team they played against UCLA. Kentucky basically hasn't had a bad night since Notre Dame in early November. Who else? So Gonzaga hasn't really had a bad night all year. Auburn really hasn't had a bad night all year. Duke has had bad nights, and Duke has had really bad stretches. They lost to Virginia, which isn't an NCAA tournament team. Miami is kind of a bubble team. They lost at home to them as well. Florida State's probably on the outside looking in. Duke lost to them. But I bring it up because while they're the most inconsistent of all the teams on this list, I would also say this. They have 5 to 6 minute stretches where you just say, oh my God, that's the best team in college basketball, where they completely lock down on offense, where they have 4 or 5 guys that are going to play or completely locked down on defense, have 4 or 5 guys that are going to play in the NBA on offense, and you're just like, oh my goodness. And this goes back to something I talked about after I saw Duke in person against Gonzaga over Thanksgiving break, and that was that, they may be the only team in college basketball. They might have 4 guys that can get you 20 on any given night. Paolo Banchero, A.J. Griffin, Mark Williams, Wendell Moore. I'd even include Trevor Keels, who, of course, was great against Kentucky in the opener. And what I would say about Duke, first of all, Jabari Smith might be the best the potential number 1 overall pick. I do think in terms of freshman difference makers, Paolo Banchero, we'll get to Chet Holmgren in a minute. Paolo Banchero is right in the mix as well. It's funny because I've been watching Duke, and I kind of in my head was like, I feel like Paolo's kind of been struggling of late. And then I looked at the stat lines. 16-14 versus Boston College, 15-10 versus Clemson. So it's not as though the guy hasn't been playing well, but what I would also say about him is, to his credit, he also has played some of his best basketball in some of the biggest games of Duke's season. I've talked about it many times. I talked about it 30 seconds ago. I was at the Gonzaga game earlier this year in November, and that was the game where, oh, by the way, this guy went for 21 points, and 20 of them were in the first half. He, of course, had 22 and 7 against Kentucky on opening night. He did get cramps in both those games, but I bring it up because he has been at his best in his biggest games. So when he gets a 16-14 versus Boston College or a 15-10 versus Clemson, it doesn't feel as good. But what I think is also important with Duke is all the other guys that are around Paolo. First of all, it goes without saying it's been a national storyline. The emergence of A.J. Griffin, another 5-star McDonald's All-American, top 10 pick coming into this year. He struggled with injuries late in his high school career, did not play a senior year of high school because of COVID. And it took him a little while at Duke because he had another injury once he got to Duke. Well, now he's back on the court. He's averaging just under 10 points per game. He's shooting some absurd, like 49% from 3. And so you look at what he brings. And then what I would also say is this. Mark Williams, like the bigs at Arizona, like Walker Kessler at Auburn, and like Chet Holmgren at Duke, Mark Williams is a game changer at the rim for Duke. This is a guy that averaged 3 blocks per game. This is a guy that really allows, he's so important to what they do. And there are games where he can go off and go crazy and score a bunch of points. Again, you go back to a couple other games from throughout the year, you could argue that he was maybe the best player on the court for Duke, depending on who they were playing and what they were playing and the role that he had. I was, again, for the 1,000th time, I was at the Gonzaga game. 17 points, 9 rebounds, 6 blocks in that game. That shows you the impact that he can have. The only thing with Duke that I would say, and this, by the way, is a credit to them, this shows me how good they are. When you talk about Duke, I think a lot of people would sit there and say, Paolo's great, Wendell Moore is great, A.J. Griffin is great, but do they have the point guard play? Well, I went in and looked it up on Sunday before I started recording this segment, and it cracks me up because I was sitting here thinking, I don't know if Duke's point guard play is good enough to win a title. Trevor Keels is averaging 12 points, 4 rebounds, and 3 assists per game with 1.5 steals. Like, that's an absurd stat line for a freshman point guard in college basketball in the ACC. And so when I look at this team, the guard play isn't as bad as I thought. They're only turning the ball over 10.5 times per game, which is one of the fewest in college basketball. And this is a team that is absolutely good enough to win it all. Can't believe how long this segment's going, so I'll try to be quick on the final two. One is Gonzaga. And listen, again, if you want to argue Gonzaga, they don't play anybody, the WCC stinks, this is what I tell you. The WCC is about to get the same number of bids, if not more, in the NCAA tournament than the ACC is. So if you say that Gonzaga doesn't play anybody, what you ultimately have to say is that Duke doesn't play anybody either. And what I would also say is this. I know every time I bring up Gonzaga, and I probably picked them to win the last 97 national championships. I'm not going to fall into that trap again. But whenever I bring up Gonzaga, people say, they'll never win a national championship coming out of that conference. And that drives me crazy because here's the bottom line. In the last 4 NCAA tournaments, they've played for the national title twice, which means that they were literally in one game, a break or two away, a bounce or two away from beating North Carolina, winning the title in 2017. And then what I would say last year, and I've said it before on the podcast, they were definitively the second best team in college basketball. The problem was that Baylor was just so much better than everybody else. And so when I look at Gonzaga, they were, and I would never wish injury upon anybody, but they were a twisted ankle from Baylor. They were a bad foul call from Baylor. They were, oh, by the way, COVID from Baylor. If COVID doesn't happen in 2020, Baylor probably at least makes an Elite Eight, probably a Final Four, and loses a bunch of players to the pros off that team. Instead, COVID happens. They all come back. Gonzaga, they probably win the national championship last year if there was no COVID. So you could go on and on and on. Oh, they're overrated. They don't play anybody. I'm just telling you, I disagree. I vehemently disagree. And if we have to disagree with that one, we're fine. What I would say about Gonzaga in terms of why I think they can win it all, and I do think this is important in the context of last season. Last season, they couldn't defend anybody. That's the biggest difference between this year and last year, is last year, they basically had to outscore everybody to win. They played that small ball lineup, Drew Timme at the 5, no rim protection. They weren't a great rebounding team, if I remember correctly. You know who's really, really, really good this year defensively? Gonzaga is. And it's because of Chet Holmgren. And I don't think people realize the impact that he has had. And I know he's this big, lanky, kind of goofy-looking kid, and he shoots a lot of threes. He is a difference maker on defense. Here's the stats. Gonzaga's number 3 in the country in field goal percentage defense, okay? They're number 3 in the country in field goal percentage defense, which, again, like Walker Kessler at Auburn, like Mark Williams at Duke, like Christian Coloco at Arizona, they have guys that protect the rim, and it changes the game. And on top of that, they get just as many buckets on offense. I should say, by the way, I think Chet Holmgren has been the difference for this team, as goofy as he sounds, as goofy as he looks. He's putting up some insane stat lines. 20 points, 17 rebounds, 6 assists, 5 assists, 6 blocks against BYU the other day. So this guy's a difference maker, and I think what's important is he changes what they do on defense, but on offense, they're the exact same team as last year. 5 players in double figures, scoring in double figures, all 5 of their starters. They shoot 38% from 3. They are the number 2 scoring offense in college basketball, behind only the number 1 scoring offense in college basketball. So you look at this team. They score as much as anybody, 90 points per game. And then on top of that, they are now playing really good defense. This really might be the year. I know I say it every year. I know I pick Gonzaga quite a bit. This really might be the year that they're good enough to win it all. Finally, number 5 is Kentucky. And listen, I've talked about Kentucky a ton, but what I would just say about Kentucky in terms of why they can win it all, I mean, if you watch the games, And it goes back to what I said a minute ago, is that really you take a team like Duke, and Duke's awesome. But Duke has had some flashes where they really don't look very good, and they've lost some weird games to some bad teams. Well, here's Kentucky's deal. Kentucky hasn't lost at full strength against anybody since way back on December 11th against Notre Dame. So basically, as I record here, they're currently sitting at 21-4 overall. They took 2 losses to Auburn and LSU in SEC play, both with major players missing injuries. They are at full strength, essentially 21-2, and that's not totally correct because they had some guys out in other games as well. But, you take out the 2 losses against Auburn and LSU where they were banged up and still almost won both games on the road. Their 2 losses at full strength are opening night to Duke and against Notre Dame back in early December. And so when I look at this team, what I like about them is they don't have nights off. They don't take bad losses, at least as of right now, 4 months into the season. And you know why that's important? It is because as we come down the stretch here, they do have some very tough games left on the schedule, but they got some built-in wins as well, and they don't take bad losses. So if they just do what they've been doing for the last 4 months, they're going to win enough games to get a number one seed in the NCAA tournament. And we all know that if you get the number 1 seed, it makes your path to a Final Four and a national championship that much easier. In terms of why I like them, I'll say this. I mean, the obvious one is they have the guy that's going to win National Player of the Year. Like we can argue Jaden Ivey this. We can argue, whoever, Jabari Smith. We can argue Johnny Davis from Wisconsin. Oscar Tshiebwe is your National Player of the Year. 16 points, 15 rebounds per game. And oh, by the way, just another ho-hum Oscar night on Saturday against Florida as Oscar Tshiebwe goes for 27 points and 19 rebounds. And again, I can't overstate this enough. That wasn't even one of his best games at Kentucky. Like, that's the crazy part, 27 and 19. That's not even not normal for Oscar Tshiebwe. But while Oscar Tshiebwe gets the attention, here's what I would say. Is we know in March, guard play matters. We know in March you need multiple ball handlers and multiple playmakers. And I was talking to a former coach the other day, multiple time, kind of a second weekend type coach, guy that's been to multiple second weekends, won a ton of tournament games. And what he said is he thinks Kentucky, I'm just going to say it. He said he thinks Kentucky's the best team in the country because of the guard play. And he thinks Kentucky's the best team in the country for this reason. It is because you really have 3 guys that can really handle the ball if you have to. Really, it's Severe Wheeler, who is, of course, second in the country in assists with over 7 per game. Ty Washington, 14.5 points, 4.5 assists per game, which I don't think people realize. Like, Ty Washington, as a secondary playmaker, would be leading most teams in assists in college basketball, and Davion Mintz can even play the point in a pinch. And so when I look at Kentucky, what I love about them is, 1, again, they basically haven't had an off night since early December. But 2, I love how all the pieces fit. I love the fact that you have the size and physicality of Oscar Tshiebwe down low. I love that you have multiple ball handlers. The only 2 things that concern me about Kentucky are this. 1, they did struggle opening night with the length of Duke. I do think the good thing is they've looked much better against similar teams of late. Could have beaten Auburn if they hadn't gotten 2 or 3 guys go down with injuries. Could have beaten LSU if they didn't have 2 or 3 guys go down with injuries. So the length I don't think is as big of an issue. But I do think the one thing you got to start worrying about if you're a Kentucky fan, and I do think this is something, there's a lot of injuries with this team, man. Severe Wheeler's missed time with the neck. Ty Washington, another ankle injury after the previous one a few weeks ago. Jacob Toppin missed the game on Saturday against Florida. So that is the only thing, and I know injuries are part of the deal in college basketball, but I'm just telling you, that's the only real thing that worries me about Kentucky is the injuries. Are they good enough?